Imagine a world where power is absolute, loyalty is fleeting, and betrayal lurks around every corner. Welcome to the dark underbelly of Philadelphia's criminal underworld, where an African-American gang led by Sam Christian rose to infamy. Known as the Black Mafia, this group's audacious acts and brutal methods sent shockwaves through the city, redefining the very notion of organized crime. In today's video, we'll delve into the chilling story of Sam Christian and his associates, exploring how they earned their notorious reputation and forever changed the landscape of criminal organizations in America. Buckle up, because this tale of power, violence, and unexpected alliances is about to begin. This gang, which included influential figures in politics and advocates for black rights, made headlines with their high-profile crimes and unprecedented violence, cementing their place as one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in American history. Interested in learning more about the notorious deeds of Sam Christian and his associates? The roots of the Philadelphia Black Mafia are deeply intertwined with significant social and political shifts. Beginning in the 1940s, a mass migration of African Americans from the southern United States to northern cities like Philadelphia ensued. This migration was driven by opportunities in wartime industries, which continued to attract labor even after World War II ended. However, as factories and mills began to close, unemployment surged, particularly in major East Coast cities such as New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. This economic downturn exacerbated poverty in the ghettos, prompting a rise in crime rates. Amidst these challenges, the African American community faced harsh living conditions and economic hardship, prompting a turn towards more radical forms of protest. While the early 1960s saw largely peaceful protests for civil rights, by the 1970s, influenced by nationalist movements, cities witnessed increased activism and unrest. Amidst these irreconcilable struggles, the federal government sought solutions. In Philadelphia, numerous public and private programs aimed to alleviate poverty and uplift disadvantaged neighborhoods, yet tangible results remained elusive. These efforts, though well-intentioned, did little to ease racial tensions. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Police Department took a more traditional and cost-effective approach. In 1964, they established a civil defense squad tasked with quelling civil disturbances. This squad also gathered intelligence, including on local political activists. Among the groups under scrutiny was the Nation of Islam, a political and religious movement founded in Detroit in 1930. The Nation of Islam espoused beliefs rooted in traditional Islamic values, but diverged significantly from mainstream Islam. For African Americans, adopting Islam over Christianity represented a rejection of ideologies associated with white supremacy. Islam, in their view, emphasized the equality of believers. However, the Nation of Islam faced significant scrutiny and criticism in the 1960s. Accused of extremism and anti-Semitism, its leader, Elijah Muhammad, had controversially advised blacks to avoid military conscription during World War II, resulting in a 4-year prison sentence for his stance. Following his release, Elijah Muhammad expanded the organization, advocating for the establishment of a separate black nation and portraying blacks as a chosen people of a new God. By the mid-1960s, the Nation of Islam boasted approximately 500,000 registered members. Notably, Malcolm X, a prominent figure within the organization for many years, remains integral to our narrative. In Philadelphia, like in other cities, a local branch of the Nation of Islam operated under the leadership of Jeremiah Shabazz. This mosque played a pivotal role during turbulent times for the Nation of Islam. Jeremiah Shabazz invested considerable effort in preaching and recruiting new members, reportedly influencing figures such as boxer Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, with his ideas. Shabazz also cultivated connections within Philadelphia's underworld, where one of his followers was Samuel Christian, a central figure in our story. Samuel Christian's criminal record began early. At just 14 years old in 1959, he was arrested for armed robbery alongside 3 other teenagers. By the age of 20, Christian had accumulated multiple arrests, primarily for involvement in illegal gambling. Described by his peers as a physically imposing man, standing under 6 feet tall and weighing 220 lbs, Christian was known for his robust build and intimidating presence. His criminal activities included robbery, aggravated assault, and illegal possession of firearms. At 25, Samuel Christian narrowly avoided a lengthy prison sentence following a botched robbery attempt during a card game among acquaintances. Known for targeting people he knew personally, Christian and his accomplices wore stockings over their heads to conceal their identities. However, the robbery quickly turned violent when a scuffle broke out, leading to gunfire that tragically claimed the life of one participant. Despite 3 victims identifying Christian as one of the perpetrators, the case against him collapsed when they refused to testify out of fear. Christian's reputation for brutality became legendary in Philadelphia. One detective described him starkly: "If you spot him on the street, pull out your gun immediately. If he sees you and suspects you're there to arrest him, he'll shoot first." The Philadelphia Black Mafia, founded by Samuel Christian no earlier than September 1968, initially consisted of an unknown number of members. By the time of its inception, the leadership comprised 14 individuals, all relatively young, with an average age of 29 years. Most of these leaders already had extensive arrest records, predominantly for violent offenses. The first documented crime attributed to the Black Mafia occurred on April 19, 1969. That day, Nathaniel Williams, known as Rock and Roll and a founding member, invited acquaintances from the group to play dice. Williams did not participate in the game himself and left shortly after it began. Approximately 30 minutes later, several armed men stormed into the room where the game was taking place. They brandished weapons, robbed the players of their money and valuables, and quickly departed. Rumors swiftly circulated, implicating Williams as the mastermind behind the brazen robbery. Upon learning that Williams was allegedly involved in driving the getaway car during the robbery, Sam Christian considered this sufficient evidence. Within 2 hours of the robbery, witnesses saw Williams forcibly taken from a bar on 15th Avenue. The following day, Williams's body, bearing 4 bullet wounds, was discovered in a Philadelphia suburb. Local authorities classified his death as an execution carried out by the Black Mafia. Police managed to arrest Sam's associate, Jerome Barnes, in connection with the murder. However, due to a lack of evidence and witnesses willing to testify, all charges against Barnes were eventually dropped. In another incident in May of that year, a member of the Black Mafia named Richard James assaulted David Truly, an official from City Hall. Truly was set to testify in a high-profile fraud trial, and the Black Mafia had been hired to intimidate him. An unidentified man contacted Truly and lured him to a remote location outside of town, suggesting he had documents of interest. When Truly arrived, he encountered several individuals, including Richard James, who proceeded to confront him. They informed Truly that the documents he was expecting would be delivered shortly by a mutual acquaintance. However, when Truly declined their invitation to walk to the meeting place, they immediately attacked him. Despite being beaten to the point of losing consciousness, Truly managed to scream, alerting a passerby who intervened and scared off the attackers. Thanks to this bystander, David Truly survived the assault. 6 months after the incident, Richard James was apprehended in New York, where he had reportedly traveled to carry out a contract killing. However, before James could testify or provide further information, he was found dead in his prison cell on February 21, 1971. The official cause of death was attributed to a heroin overdose, which authorities suspected was orchestrated by members of the Black Mafia. It was believed they staged James' death out of fear that he might divulge incriminating information during interrogations. During this period, the Black Mafia confined its operations to African-American neighborhoods in Philadelphia. Initially focused on robbery and extortion, their targets often included black businessmen who were not always cooperative or compliant with their demands. Occasionally, they maintained good relations with the law, as in the case of David. However, the group was also involved in contract killings and intimidation. Sam Christian realized that such activities would never lead to big money. The gang could not afford to deal in drugs because they lacked the necessary funds to buy the goods. They decided to engage in extortion on a broader scale, terrorizing legitimate businesses as well as those operating in the black or gray economic zones. To make money from extortion, the gang needed a reputation for being ruthless and willing to stop at nothing to intimidate their victims. Earning that reputation became their focus. On several occasions in 1969 and 1970, Sam Christian and his associates shot up the windows of bars whose owners refused to share their profits. On September 21, 1970, several members of the Black Mafia broke into a bar, shot and killed the bartender, and took $250 from the cash register. Although it was evening and there were customers in the bar, no charges were filed because none of the witnesses agreed to cooperate with the police. The group's reputation grew rapidly. Gradually, Sam Christian, in addition to extorting businesses en masse, cracked down on all the local small gangs. However, in early 1970, the Black Mafia faced a competitor they were not yet able to contend with, a group of black Muslims affiliated with Temple No. 12, one of the divisions of the Nation of Islam. By the late 1960s, the number of black Muslims in Philadelphia was about 10,000. While it is not possible to determine how many were members of the Nation of Islam, it can be accurately said that in 1969, the criminal wing of the Philadelphia branch of the Nation of Islam far outnumbered the Black Mafia in both members and weapons. A confrontation between the two groups seemed inevitable, as did the defeat of the Black Mafia. Faced with the prospect of a war for spheres of influence, Sam Christian decided to reform the Black Mafia. The Black Mafia merged with Temple No. 12, a division of the Nation of Islam. Many members of the Black Mafia already professed Islam and were members of the mosque. Sam had converted to Islam in the mid-1960s, impressed by the sermons of Elijah Muhammad. After the merger, he reported directly to its leader, Jeremiah Shabazz. Some members of the Black Mafia decided not to embrace Islam, but they continued their work under Sam's protection, albeit now paying a higher percentage of their profits as a tax. The alliance with the Nation of Islam opened new horizons for the Black Mafia. Its members no longer had to worry about their safety. If victims had previously tried not to testify against members of the Black Mafia, now they certainly would not. Initially, the top leadership of the Black Mafia was unhappy about sharing part of their profits, about $4,000 a month, with the temple. However, they quickly realized that for this small amount, they acquired much more. The Black Mafia became a serious political problem for local authorities, transforming from a mere gang into a formidable force. Now, it could exploit the themes of race and religion, and Sam's lawyers did not fail to take advantage of this. There was a case when two defendants were able to appeal their verdict on the grounds that it was based on racial and religious prejudice. Now, any case of robbery and extortion involving a member of the Black Mafia took on serious overtones. Another unexpected advantage of the merger was the ability of Black Muslims to hide unwanted criminals in their mosques. Local authorities tried to avoid any conflict situations with the Nation of Islam and refrained from disturbing them unnecessarily. The Black Mafia also had the opportunity to recruit new members from among prisoners in many northeastern U.S. prisons. A large number of Black Muslims were serving their sentences, and they were a cohesive force. The Black Mafia expanded its ranks by recruiting some of these prisoners, who then made money even while incarcerated. Many young prisoners joined their prison gangs for protection from other inmates. This protection was not free and had to be paid for with money. The Black Mafia also exploited businesses owned by the Nation of Islam in Philadelphia. Since none of the members of the Black Mafia had official jobs, they took fictitious jobs at firms owned by Temple No. 12. With such influential support secured, the gang felt emboldened and believed they no longer had to worry about the law. Shortly after merging with the Nation of Islam, the Black Mafia committed one of the most notorious crimes in the history of Philadelphia. On January 4, 1971, 8 members of the group, led by Nudie Mims, robbed a furniture store. The robbery itself was not surprising, but the brutality with which it was committed was shocking. Although none of the 20 people in the store at the time offered any resistance, all were brutally beaten, and 2 were shot. Mims personally doused the bodies of those shot with gasoline and then set them on fire. The gang's loot amounted to only $3,000, but the extreme violence of the crime forced law enforcement to take serious notice. Another reason for the brutal robbery was that the store's management had repeatedly received demands for protection payments from the Black Mafia, but had refused to pay. Mims would later be sentenced to life in prison for his part in the crime. A month after the furniture store robbery, the gang members robbed 2 banks a few weeks apart. In both cases, the robbery scheme was roughly the same. Threatening with guns, they ordered all bank employees to remove their clothes and then beat them. These 2 robberies enriched the Black Mafia by $122,000. On September 6, 1971, 7 members of the Black Mafia, led this time by the gang's founder, Sam Christian, robbed the Adelphia Bar in Atlantic City. There were 25 customers in the bar at the time of the robbery, but that didn't stop the attackers. The proceeds amounted to $145,000. Gradually, information about these and other Black Mafia crimes became public. In the spring of 1971, a reporter was interviewing an inmate in prison about drug use, and the inmate began to reveal details about the Black Mafia's operations. The inmate, clearly nervous about accidentally mentioning such important people, told the reporter that the Black Mafia was rumored to be a gang of ruthless killers who had controlled the entire drug trade in the local ghetto for the past 5 years. Another former drug addict in an interview said that he had to deal with those dealers who had been taxed by the Black Mafia. According to him, those dealers who were not able to pay Sam the right amount of money right away usually got a second chance. The dealer would get even more product to sell in a shorter period of time. If the dealer did not manage to collect the required amount of money, he was killed. From the very beginning, the members of the group thought about getting involved in selling drugs. Initially, the only thing that stopped them was the lack of money. However, over time, as the Black Mafia grew in power, it managed to take control of many street drug dealers. In those years, the most popular drug in Philadelphia's black neighborhoods was heroin. Most of the heroin in Philadelphia was shipped through New York via channels that Frank Matthews had established. While in New York, Matthews sold heroin through a network of his own dealers. However, in other cities, he sold the product in bulk to local dealers who then sold it themselves. In Philadelphia, Matthews cooperated with Tyrone Palmer. On April 2, 1972, Palmer was murdered by members of the Black Mafia. He was shot and killed in front of a huge crowd at the Harlem nightclub in Atlantic City. This club, where Frank Sinatra himself once liked to have breakfast, became the scene of a real massacre. During the shootout, in addition to Palmer, one of his bodyguards and 3 women who accompanied the drug dealer were killed. About 20 people were injured during the indiscriminate shooting and the ensuing panic. Almost all members of the Black Mafia, including Sam Christian, were able to leave the club, but almost all of them were soon apprehended by police officers. Only Sam Christian managed to escape. He made his way to Chicago, where he found refuge in the mosques of the Nation of Islam. Palmer's murder was a signal to Matthews, a warning that he must share with the Black Mafia the income he had earned in its territory. Matthews did not immediately take the hint, so Sam's men had to take out 3 more drug dealers connected to him. Only after this string of murders did Matthews agree to pay 10% of the money he earned in Philadelphia. As for the investigation of the murders, it ended the same way as many other Black Mafia cases. All charges were dropped as the victims and witnesses categorically refused to appear in court and testify. Part of the murdered Tyrone Palmer's place was taken by Benjamin Major Coxson. Coxson can rightfully be considered one of the most colorful figures not only of Philadelphia, but of the entire American underworld. A businessman, civil rights activist, and owner of one of the biggest nightclubs in Philadelphia, Coxson could boast of friendships with such notable figures as the great boxer Muhammad Ali. To say that after one of his victories, Muhammad Ali said on live television that he was dedicating it to his friend, the next mayor of Camden, New Jersey, Mayor Coxson, would not be an exaggeration. In 1972, Coxson did run for mayor of Camden, a small town in suburban Philadelphia, but failed. Coxson quickly realized that it was better to maintain good relations with the Black Mafia. In return, he provided the gang with numerous connections in the drug trade and helped launder money. Together with the Black Mafia, Major registered several companies and also gave a lot of advice on profitable financial fraud schemes. It was on Coxson's advice that the gang developed a fraudulent scheme involving a shell company called Pyramid Enterprises, Inc. It was perhaps one of the few Black Mafia cases that did not involve bloodshed. The essence of the scam involved credit card applications made in the fictitious names of employees of a firm that never existed. When bank employees called the firm to verify that the credit card applicants were employees, they were given all the necessary information. Meanwhile, several organizations, including the DEA, were tracking Frank Matthews' activities. On January 5, 1973, he was arrested in Las Vegas. Matthews was indicted on numerous charges related to the possession and distribution of over $1.5 million worth of narcotics. Around the same time, the Internal Revenue Service also pursued Matthews, filing a lawsuit to recover $7 million. Matthews faced the possibility of up to 50 years behind bars, and initially, his bail was set at about $5 million. However, his lawyers successfully reduced it to $100,000. After posting bail, Matthews was released from jail. Since then, he has never been seen again. There were rumors that he had hidden $20 million in a safe place and then fled the country. With Matthews' disappearance, the Black Mafia lost a significant source of profits. Additionally, without Matthews, their fully operational network of distributors supplied by him was left without product. Seizing this opportunity, the Black Mafia decided to take action. This is where Coxson stepped in. Using his connections, he found a supplier from New York rumored to be connected to the Gambino family. Coxson began delivering goods from New York to Philadelphia, which the Black Mafia sold through a network of dealers who had previously been extorted and were now compelled to work for themselves. By January 1973, the activities of the Black Mafia drew increased attention, not only from law enforcement, but also from the federal media. Previously known mainly to residents of Philadelphia and its suburbs, the Black Mafia's notoriety soared after the commission of a particularly brutal murder. In the mid-1950s, a young man named Ernest Timothy McGee joined the Nation of Islam. Through his powerful oratory skills, McGee quickly gained prominence, attracting the attention of Nation of Islam leaders, including Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. They were impressed with his abilities and began to promote his career within the organization. However, McGee soon fell into disgrace as his beliefs clashed with the policies the organization sought to implement. After a particularly heated argument with Elijah Muhammad, McGee moved to New York City, where he converted to the Sunni branch of Islam and opened a Hanafi center in Harlem. He also changed his name to Hamas Abdul Khalis and began to develop his movement. By the end of 1972, Khalis's movement had about 1,000 members. Khalis decided that the moment had come to confront his former comrades in the Nation of Islam in an ideological dispute. He wrote a letter of denunciation and sent it to 57 Nation of Islam mosques across the country. In this letter, Khalis denounced black Muslims and Elijah Muhammad, calling him a false prophet and a lying deceiver. A few days later, Khalis sent another letter accusing Elijah of duping and deceiving people. On January 12, 1973, several members of the Black Mafia traveled to Washington, D.C., where Ernest Timothy McGee, now known as Hamas Abdul Khalis, had a 3-story house. They conducted reconnaissance and found the house on a street corner with no guards outside, situated next to a busy highway. On the morning of January 17th, John Clark, a Black Mafia hitman, called Sam Christian and used the code phrase "Bring your shoes," signaling the armed team to proceed to Washington. On January 17, 1973, the 7 Black Mafia operatives followed their pre-arranged plan. John Clark called Khalis's home, introducing himself as Tommy Jones and inquiring about purchasing religious pamphlets. Khalis's 22-year-old daughter, Amina, who sensed no deception, replied that the pamphlets were in stock and could be picked up around 2 in the afternoon. At the appointed time, the gang arrived at Khalis's mansion in 2 cars. 2 of the gang members knocked on the door. Amina, fortunate to survive the massacre, later recalled looking out the window and seeing two well-dressed men in the courtyard, each with a cigarette behind their ear, an unusual sight for Muslims. Amina adhered to Hanafi religious principles that forbid a woman from opening the door to strangers. Instead, her brother Dar cracked the door open on a chain. The visitors requested a single pamphlet and handed Dar an amount exceeding its value by $1. Dar returned with the change, only to find a gun held to his head by John Clark. Clark directed Dar to open the door fully and step away. Once inside, one of the Black Mafia operatives declared it a robbery. They gathered all the adult occupants of the house into the living room, ordering them to lie face down on the floor while they tied their hands and feet. Clark loudly inquired if anyone else was in the house. They mentioned 3 children on the upper floors. Clark instructed his men to locate everyone in the house. While they searched, the robbers ransacked belongings, searching for valuables. Clark interrogated Dar and Amina about the location of money, believing such a wealthy house must have a large stash. When they insisted there was no significant amount, only enough for small expenses, Clark ordered all hostages to the basement. One of the attackers informed Clark about a safe in the bedroom. Dar handed over the key, but the safe was empty. Enraged, Clark took Dar to a prayer room, forced him to kneel, and fatally shot him 3 times in the head. After disposing of Dar's body, Clark turned to Amina and demanded to know why her father had written those letters. Amina replied that she had never interfered in her father's affairs. Clark then took Amina to the 3rd floor and ordered her to kneel down. Shockingly, despite being shot twice in the head, Amina managed to survive. She witnessed one of Clark's accomplices killing her younger brother. Seeing Amina was still alive, one of the accomplices shot her 2 more times in the head. Despite the terrible pain, the bullets used were old and flattened upon impact, allowing Amina to survive without losing consciousness. At that moment, Abdul N., a friend of Kalis's family, arrived at the house. He had come to return Kalis's wife's wallet, which she had forgotten near the local supermarket. As Abdul approached the house and opened the door, Mafia operatives jumped on him, tied him up, and gagged him. He was then taken to the 3rd floor, where he was killed by 2 gunshots. One of the gang members, James Price, reasonably remarked that he thought it was unnecessary to kill the younger ones because they were too young to recognize the attackers. According to survivor Amina's recollection, he also uttered a phrase indicating that he had only signed up to rob Hamas's house and possibly kill him, but not to massacre everyone. The other assailant, later identified as Ronald Harvey, replied that the children should die too, because they were the offspring of a hypocrite. Everyone in the house at the time of the attack was killed, except for Amina, who was seriously wounded. However, the main target of the attackers, Kalis himself, was not among them. The assassins decided to wait for him. Kalis's wife, Haja, was outside the supermarket, waiting for Abdul to bring her purse. The journey from the supermarket to her house took no more than 10 minutes. She called home from a payphone, but no one answered. Worried, she went to the coffee shop where Kalis was staying and told him that no one was answering the phone at home. The couple drove Kalis's car to their house, where they saw Abdul's car parked outside. The front door to their house was locked, so Haja knocked loudly. She saw the face of an unfamiliar man in a neighboring window. Kalis loudly asked who it was, and Ron Harvey shouted, "It's Tommy!" At that moment, Kalis realized something terrible had happened. He yelled to his wife to immediately go to the neighbors and call the police. He then went to the front door, which suddenly opened. Ron Harvey attempted to pull Kalis inside, but Kalis, being a rather strong man, managed to break free and run away from the house. Harvey ran after him, but quickly realized that pursuing him would attract the attention of passers-by. He turned around and ran to the back door. Hoping to catch up with at least one of the criminals, Kalis drove off, but soon lost sight of them and returned to his house. All of the attackers were able to leave Washington unharmed. The Black Mafia had completely failed in their mission. Kalis survived, and the assailants left behind a mass of crucial evidence at the crime scene. The financial gain from the crime was negligible. The criminals only managed to find $1,000 at Kalis's home. They donated $200 to the temple and divided the remaining $800 among themselves. The result of this unprecedented and brutal attack was the death of 7 people, an event that shook the entire United States. The reaction of Nation of Islam officials was interesting. Jeremiah Shabazz, when asked by reporters whether the attackers were really members of Temple 12, said he did not want to answer because journalists would write that the attackers were black Muslims. Another Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, went even further, claiming the crime was the work of FBI agents trying to discredit his movement. A grief-stricken nation watched as the tragic story unfolded. Kalis blamed the Nation of Islam for the crime in each of his many interviews. Even boxer Muhammad Ali, whom Kalis accused of funding black Muslims, got caught in the controversy. Ali had to issue a special address to the press, categorically denying the involvement of the Nation of Islam in the crime. However, law enforcement authorities had a different perspective. Near the scene of the crime, police found a suitcase containing a .38 caliber handgun, a copy of the Philadelphia Daily News, and several credit cards that belonged to a man named Willie Horton. They also found a pay stub in the name of John Clark. It turned out that the gun belonged to a member of the Philadelphia chapter of the Nation of Islam, and the credit cards belonged to a man who had been robbed by members of the Black Mafia a few months earlier. The same credit card was used by the criminals to pay for a hotel room where the gang stayed the night before the murder. As a result, everyone involved in the attack was arrested. Despite the abundance of circumstantial evidence, the most valuable testimony came from one of the accomplices who decided to cooperate with the authorities. James Price, a participant in the attack, was identified by Amina Kiff on June 7, 1973, as one of the assailants in the January 1973 attack. In addition to being charged with this crime, Price faced several other charges in Philadelphia. Eager to save himself from the death penalty, Price agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. On July 3, 1973, FBI agents obtained a 45-page confession from Price in which he detailed all the circumstances of the crime in Washington. The other participants in the crime were indicted on August 15th of that year. The court announced the verdict in this case in 1974, sentencing 4 of the 7 assailants to life imprisonment. Although James Price actively cooperated with the investigation and could have received a lesser term, he was killed in prison in the fall of 1974. Only one participant in the attack, Jerome Sinclair, managed to escape punishment. The court acquitted him due to a lack of evidence. Kalis was outraged by the judge's verdict, having expected all the killers to be sentenced to death. He was deeply disappointed with the outcome of the trial. So hungry for justice, a few years later, in March 1977, he led an armed Hanafi group that took over a government building in downtown Washington, D.C. For 2 days, the group held about 150 people hostage. Collapse demanded that his family's murderers be extradited to him, as well as those involved in the assassination of Malcolm X. None of these demands were met. 39 hours after the building was seized, the hostages were released, and Hamas Collapse was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never received what he considered a fair sentence for the killers and died in prison in 2003. But let's go back for a bit. In the spring of 1973, the Black Mafia was at the height of its power. The fact that the group was under scrutiny by the authorities after the massacre in Washington did not bother Sam Christian. He was confident in his own impunity. The gang's fame in the criminal world had reached such heights that it even had imitators. However, the gang members were ruthless and eliminated any competition. The Black Mafia's enterprises were well organized. Jeremiah Shabazz provided the gang with Nation of Islam mosques across the country as safe houses, meeting places, and warehouses. Coxson provided Sam Christian with connections in the underworld that he could never have dreamed of before. Coxson played a vital role in making deals and was the organizer of many financial scams. However, Coxson did not consider one crucial detail. Once he introduced Sam Christian to useful contacts, he ceased to be necessary. Soon, the Black Mafia found a reason to eliminate their former accomplice who knew too much. The Black Mafia continued to dominate the heroin trade in Philadelphia, with suppliers rumored to be connected to the Gambino family. In the spring of 1973, another shipment was sent to Philadelphia. This cargo did not reach the Black Mafia, as it was accidentally intercepted by 2 dark-skinned men, Hilton Stoudt and Walter Tillman. In reality, they were ordinary small-time criminals who couldn't believe their luck and had no idea what to do with such a valuable haul. The Italians, wanting to recover their goods, turned to Coxson for help in capturing Stoudt and Tillman, promising him a reward of $300,000. Coxson then made a deal with his partners from the Black Mafia. They were to find the thieves for $200,000. Members of the Black Mafia took on the task with brutal efficiency. On the morning of May 1st, they tracked down Stoudt and Tillman and shot them in cold blood without asking where the heroin was. Coxson's New York partners were furious. With the murder of Stoudt and Tillman, the last thread that could lead them to the lost heroin had been destroyed. To make matters worse, the murders made the front pages of every Philadelphia newspaper. The New York people refused to pay Coxson. The major was in a quandary. The Black Mafia believed they had fulfilled their part of the deal and expected the promised $200,000 from Coxson, but he had no such money. For several weeks, tensions ran high as Coxson scrambled to find a solution. He traveled around Philadelphia, vainly trying to borrow such a sum of money from any of his acquaintances. Coxson had no illusions and knew what awaited him if he did not pay up on time. Early in the morning of June 8, 1973, Coxson was awakened by a knock on the door. Samuel Christian himself, along with the second most important man in the organization, Ron Harvey, had arrived at his house. Both Sam and Ron had been to his house before and were familiar with his family. However, once everyone had gone into the living room, the unexpected happened. Ron Harvey pounced on Coxson and knocked him to the floor, while the other gang members tied up Coxson's family members. Coxson's 13-year-old stepson, Lex, was also bound and gagged, left lying in his own bed. After waiting for his attacker to leave the bedroom, Lex managed to get out of bed and walked to the sliding window with his hands tied behind his back. He successfully opened the window and climbed out. Coxson's neighbors lived 130 feet away, and Lex made his way to their door, banging on it with his head. Fortunately, the neighbors were awake and quickly let him into their home. While Lex sought refuge with the neighbors, the Black Mafia killed his entire family. Police arriving soon afterward found 4 bodies in the house, each bound hand and foot, all shot dead. Coxson's common-law wife, Lois, survived but was severely wounded and later blinded from her injuries. Police began questioning witnesses, but residents of the neighborhood couldn't provide significant information beyond seeing 4 dark-skinned men in a black Cadillac. Lois informed investigators that she had heard her husband's last words when he opened the door for the criminals, saying, "Hey Sam, come on in." She was also able to identify one of the attackers as Ron Harvey. A few weeks after Coxson's murder, Ron Harvey was subpoenaed to testify in the Washington, D.C. murder case. In his candid confession, James Price had implicated Harvey as one of the key figures in that tragic event. However, Ron Harvey failed to appear at the hearing, leading to his arrest for contempt of court on July 3rd. Additionally, Harvey was indicted on 11 counts related to the murder of the Coxson family. His wife, Lucinda, managed to post bail of $165,000, after which Harvey fled the city. He secretly left Philadelphia and relocated to Chicago, finding refuge in a mosque affiliated with the Nation of Islam. Meanwhile, Sam Christian also left Philadelphia, hiding in a mosque in Detroit. Their hiding didn't last long. On March 27, 1974, FBI agents arrested Harvey. This time, the bail amount was set at $5.5 million. On November 21st of that year, Harvey was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of the Carlis family in Washington. 3 years later, he faced trial again for the Coxson family murder, resulting in another life sentence. Shortly after this conviction, in August 1977, Harvey died of heart failure in a prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri. Sam Christian's freedom did not last as long as Harvey's. He was arrested on December 11, 1973. Authorities set bail at $1 million, but Sam was never convicted of the murder charges against him. Witnesses refused to testify, and the only crime for which investigators could charge him was a 1971 robbery of a Harlem liquor store, during which a police officer was killed. Sam was sentenced to a 20-year prison term, but was paroled in November 1988. After Sam Christian's arrest, leadership of the Black Mafia passed to Eugene Bo Baines. On New Year's Eve 1974, the Black Mafia decided to organize a ball for its leadership and close associates, attended by about 50 people. This event was held in one of Philadelphia's finest ballrooms. However, it turned out to be one of the last celebrations for Sam's comrades. On August 22, 1974, Philadelphia police conducted a search at the home of member George Sampson. They discovered 2 shotguns, a pistol, 25 bags of heroin, and ledgers containing the names of local businessmen and bankers from whom the Black Mafia had extorted money. That same year, the Drug Enforcement Administration completed its 6-month investigation, revealing that the Black Mafia had begun importing heroin and cocaine from Jamaica. This breakthrough in the investigation marked a significant shift, as it was previously believed that the heroin primarily came from New York. The change in suppliers was likely connected to events in New York and the exit of Frank Matthews from the business. DEA leadership did not conceal their satisfaction upon receiving evidence that the Black Mafia remained active in the drug trade. However, this move by Sam Christian's successors to secure new drug suppliers ultimately sealed the organization's fate. It became more convenient and profitable for the Black Mafia to extort street-level drug dealers rather than engage directly in the drug trade. Such extortion cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute. Yet, the leadership of the Black Mafia made a fatal mistake. They became greedy and were not satisfied with merely extorting tributes from local drug dealers. They seized a large portion of the heroin market in Philadelphia. In September 1974, federal narcotics agents and members of an organized crime task force conducted a nighttime raid, apprehending 21 people. John Bartels Jr., the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, declared that the infamous Philadelphia Black Mafia had been dismantled. On September 11th of that year, a grand jury indicted Eugene Baines, James Fox, Eugene Hearn, and other gang members on charges related to running a large drug distribution network. The DEA estimated that the Black Mafia controlled more than 60% of heroin sales in Philadelphia during that period. Around the same time, the Black Mafia's patrons began to encounter difficulties. On February 25, 1975, Elijah Muhammad, the longtime leader of the Nation of Islam, passed away. In the last years of his reign, he had loosened his control over the organization's affiliates, granting the Black Mafia greater freedom in Philadelphia. There were even rumors that the Muslim mosque in Philadelphia would be disbanded due to the bad publicity it brought on the entire movement. However, it did not come to disbandment. After Elijah Muhammad's death, his son, Wallace Fard Muhammad, became the new leader of the Nation of Islam. He implemented a series of reforms that radically transformed the organization. These reforms were significant for the Philadelphia branch of the Nation of Islam. Under the new leader, Philadelphia's Black Muslims saw Jeremiah Shabazz appointed head of all East Coast branches, a move that was considered an honorable exile. By 1976, Shabazz had departed from the organization, leading to a decline in influence for the Philadelphia branch of the Nation of Islam. The power of the Black Mafia waned as arrests of its leaders and restructuring efforts by the Nation of Islam's new leadership pushed the organization toward disbandment. Sensing this opportunity, other gangs began to reclaim lost territory. On June 15, 1975, interim leader Sam Christian Jerome Barnes was fatally shot in broad daylight. On November 5, 1975, Herschel Williams, one of the founders of the organization, was murdered. Initially, it was cited as over a debt of $2,000 owed for a cocaine supply. However, some believe this small debt couldn't have been the sole reason for his killing. There's an opinion that Williams was shot because Roy Hoskins and Lonnie Dawson, fellow members of the Black Mafia, sought to take over his drug territory. Shortly after, Hoskins and Dawson were arrested and received life sentences. In the 1980s, many other members of the Black Mafia found themselves losing influence. Despite attempts to reclaim their former spheres of power, most of these efforts failed. Russell Barnes, the organization's former hitman, was among those who made unsuccessful attempts to regain his standing. Released from prison in 1985 after serving a 10-year sentence for heroin distribution, Barnes joined one of Philadelphia's youth gangs and began extorting street-level heroin dealers. However, 6 months after his release, Barnes was murdered. Meanwhile, Sam Christian returned to the streets of Philadelphia with little fanfare. Paroled on November 4, 1988, at the age of 50, he attempted to regain favor with the second generation of the Black Mafia and mediate between warring factions. However, his efforts were unsuccessful as the younger members rejected him. An investigator later commented, "Sam wanted to teach the kids discipline, but these kids likely had no concept of the discipline seen in the Black Mafia of the 1970s." In July 1990, Sam was arrested for possession of crack cocaine, violating his parole and returning to prison. Released again in the mid-1990s, the former head of Philadelphia's most notorious criminal syndicate attempted to lead a lawful life, albeit with mixed success. On January 22, 2002, he was arrested once more for parole violation. Sam passed away on March 6, 2016, in a nursing home, while most of his former associates had already died in prison, including Nudie Mims, who passed away in a Minnesota prison in 2012 at the age of 69. Samuel's successor as head of the Black Mafia, Eugene Bo Baines, died free in 2012 at the age of 73. With the decline of the original Black Mafia, a new generation emerged in the form of the Junior Black Mafia. Some researchers initially speculated that old Black Mafia members might have mentored the new syndicate, but evidence suggests this was not the case. The founders of the Junior Black Mafia, Aaron Jones, Mark Casey, and Leonard Patterson, borrowed certain elements from the old organization but adapted to the changing times. The founders of the Junior Black Mafia initially focused on recruiting their friends to sell drugs. Aaron Jones assumed the leadership role, and while initially the management group included all the gang's founders, over time, Jones consolidated power in his hands. Prospective members had to demonstrate their own networks for drug distribution to gain entry into the organization. Pennsylvania authorities estimated that within 3 years of its founding, by 1990, the Junior Black Mafia had grown to approximately 100 members and around 300 street-level drug distributors. However, it soon found itself entangled in conflicts with other Philadelphia gangs, lacking the aggression and ruthlessness of its predecessors. Despite sharing some traits with Sam Christian's brainchild, the Junior Black Mafia was nowhere near as fearsome as the original Black Mafia that had terrorized Philadelphia in the 1970s. By 1992, most of the leaders of the Junior Black Mafia were either dead or in prison. The Philadelphia Black Mafia, led by Samuel Christian, stands out as one of the most violent gangs in 20th century history. Samuel Christian's name alone could strike fear into the hearts of Philadelphia residents and its neighborhoods. He embodied the gang he had created. However, upon his release from prison, he found himself largely out of the organized crime scene in Philadelphia, surviving only as a reminder of its past. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more gripping tales from history's underworld. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for watching Undefined.